Good morning. Everybody's wide awake, bushy-tailed. We are going to call this meeting for State Government Finance and Policy Committee to order. Today is Thursday, February 13th, which is a reminder for all of you, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. Buy your flowers for your significant others. I would entertain a motion, Vice Chair Davis, to approve the minutes. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, so today we have several bills in committee, and I want to give a preface before we do, because we do have several members of the public that are here to testify that have likely not testified before. We have a thing where we always go through the chair whenever we are going to address the committee. So if a member is asking a question, you don't respond directly to the member, you speak through the chair. That's just the protocol that we have here. For each member of the public that is testifying, my committee administrator will be timing your testimony because we have a relatively full agenda and we'll have lots of commentary. So the cards will be going up so that when your time is concluding, you'll know that your time is concluding so that we can be respectful of the process. We have two bills today that are going to be somewhat emotional, I would say, that there are some strong feelings that are going to be running through the undercurrents of those things. We are not going to go after the authors. We are not going to go after members. We are not going to go after members of the executive branch. We are going to speak to the bills, and we're going to speak directly to the bills as to why you are for or against those bills. And that's how this is going to run. So, first on the agenda, we have House File 289, Representative Quam. If you'd like to make your way down to the testifiers table. No need to welcome you to your own committee. Representative Quam, if you'd like to move your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what was the chair's preference to the GR or?
Yes, the motion would be to make a motion to send this to the General Register.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would move that House File 289 be approved and sent to the General Register.
Representative Quam moves that the House File 289 be sent to the General Register. To your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this bill actually started when I attended a faculty union meeting. And they brought up, hey, it's that time of year again. We need members to be on a committee to figure out how we spend the remaining funds we've got in the budget so we don't lose it. And they didn't seem happy about it because, frankly, they wish they had a voice in how some of the money that they received in a budget was spent. Because they're the ones that are interacting with the public, doing the job, and they thought, we might know a little bit more than what the legislature does. And from that was birthed this bill in a slightly different form. Unfortunately, it was when we had a multi-billion-dollar deficit. I believe it was $5 or $6 billion. And the cuts and the constraints, there wasn't much extra money available. The legislature had trimmed, well, frankly, back then, I think it was in the 30s or low 40s were the budgets. And, $5-6 billion was a big percentage, and there was a lot of hardship. It did get utilized before the sunset kicked in, but there was not a great deal of utilization. But I never gave up the hope that we would be able to empower the actual people doing the job, the frontline people, to have, a say if, this is a waste and would, not help the mission, then they ought to be able to flag. It's just like when you empower them and they start thinking and looking, hopefully they'll catch fraud, waste, and abuse. But this is aimed at more of the waste area or inefficiency. When I've talked to other agency personnel in different agencies across the state, they said, instead of giving us this software package or doing this, we really need to replace all these green monitor tubes and the old hardware because we've got problems. So the intent behind here is to give a mechanism to the people that are frontline working and serving our citizens, doing the job, to have their eyes open to see what might be, saved. That would give us 50% would go back to the to the state budget. So it'd help with budget reserves and et cetera. The other 50% would go to a fund to be spent on the mission. And that committee that determined what that was spent would be faculty and administration. If it's a college campus, it would be the management and the workers. So it'd be a balance of people to decide, well, we've been waiting for 8 years to get this that would help us do the job better. It would give them a mechanism to be able to make those selections, empowering them, so to speak, in their job. Besides saving the money, when I talked to the union members after their meeting, it would make them feel better, and empowered. But when they're listened to and they have a voice, I think workers are more engaged and do, better service. And I think made 2 or 3 of the people smile about the possibilities. Now, after the sunset kicked in and this disappeared, we started having, surpluses and et cetera. I think the timing of this is better because it would have us in the near term before the tails budget kicked in, thinking about the spending and having a conversation and involvement of those people actually doing the work. When it first passed, former Rep. Simon was a co-author, former Rep. Winkler was a co-author, and it passed unanimously in the Senate, and there were only 6 no votes in the House. And it felt good to have, a bipartisan expression of empowering our state workers. And that's the premise. I'm sorry about meandering a little bit, but this is it was the first bill I had drafted, and I've always felt good about it because it involved, the workers. So, Mr. Speaker, or Mr.
Well, I
Chair.
don't need the promotion to speaker. We'll just go with chair. But Chair Quam, I believe you have the A1 amendment that you would like engrossed into your bill.
Thank you. This is just a technical, and it allows for a more expeditious implementation. Since this already had been implemented, it's a turning on of the switch again.
So Representative Quam moves.
I would so move to add the A1 amendment.
Representative Quam moves for the adoption of the A1. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? The amendment is adopted and engrossed into your bill. Members, questions on the bill as amended? Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Quam, for bringing this today. I am curious, I appreciate the intent behind this bill as someone who's worked in a local government before, so I understand like how that can be valuable. One thing that I noted, though, that it was underutilized. Can you share a little bit more? So given its history, how do you think it might change? Like why? If and how there would be more uptake if we were to pass this.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, when there's been a huge increase in the budget, we've noticed, through audits and other things, of where there's maybe been an increase of the waste, fraud, and abuse has gone up. I think this timing is, we've got much larger budgets. We've got, we're spending tens of billions of dollars more than when this was going on. We didn't have a $5-6 billion deficit, so we didn't have the constraint. We're coming with a more robust budget and process. So I think there's more opportunity. I think there also, towards the end, was the Odyssey Fund. So they opted for the Odyssey Fund, maybe, instead of this. But I honestly think I was a freshman. This is my first few weeks. There are things, timing-wise, that I might have done differently. And when I saw, the budget and the opportunities, so to speak, plus I've heard from members of DHS, MDH, and others who are speaking up about, we shouldn't be spending the money here, or there's this waste or excess, but we really need to spend it over here. I think this is timely to energize our state employees to be able to feel as if they have a voice and to have their eyes open and be involved instead of going through the motions and maybe things are missed. And I don't think we'll have as much that'll show up in the audit reports if we have the engagement of employees that see that we trust them, we believe in their capabilities, and they are heard.
Representative Jones. Further questions? Very well. Anyone else? Oh, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Representative Freiberg, we'll get to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Quam. Probably more of a comment than anything. I appreciate what you're trying to do. It's maybe disappointing that, and would be helpful to have more of an understanding of why it wasn't so used. I will point out, I really appreciate your respect and lifting up of the workers for our state government and in these agencies. They do great work. And I would say that I wish our president had the same respect for employees of the federal government.
Thank you for your comment. Representative Kraft. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. We've seen this bill before. It's been around for a few years. So it's too bad it wasn't used more initially. As you said, there might have been some budgetary constraints then that aren't quite as prominent right now. So, just speaking for myself, I'm comfortable voting for this and hopefully keeping it moving forward. And hopefully there are ways we can find ways to increase usage. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Representative Freiberg. I think Representative Bonner is next. Representative Bonner.
Thank you. I know we talked about this bill, I think last session as well. I agree with everybody. I love the concept of this bill. I love the idea of it. And you know that I'm a very team-focused person, so I love that aspect. The one challenge that I've always struggled with on this bill is two things. One, I think sometimes employees may not always, if they are not the person managing the budget, they may not always understand the decisions that are made or why we make a decision or not make a decision, which I struggle with a little bit as often the person who actually had to do the budget, that sometimes my engineers and folks didn't always understand, you know, that the higher ups were requiring that I do a certain thing, or that we have to put in additional hours because we have a specific deadline that we need to meet, and or they maybe just didn't like the deadline. That could be true too. So I think that's really challenging. But the other thing that I've struggled with on this is I like the flexibility of having the input, but at the same time, I do wonder, you know, if a manager tries very hard or tries to incentivize their team, let's say, to save money. You know, we set out a budget to hit all of what we think we're going to spend. But again, it's our best guess. We don't know, right? So it's not unlikely that we could end up having some money left over. Maybe we didn't get to hire the FTE we wanted, or we decided that we couldn't order the new printer that we wanted, whatever. But I think one of the things that, which by the way is a good thing if we don't spend all the money that we were allocated, just to be clear. But the other thing is, if we have that leftover money, or we try to incentivize our folks to, let's say, find ways to find efficiencies or save money, and we're rewarded with this pool at the end. And I know you mentioned it too with the Odyssey Fund, but I think that says to me, if we were to do that, maybe we are doing that intentionally to try and reserve money so that we, at the end of the year, if there are things that we normally wouldn't be able to fit in our budget, that, you know, the things that get kicked down the road, right? Because we just don't have the money. Like, we really, really need a new printer, and we're trying to patch this thing up 20 times. It needs to be replaced, but we don't have the money right now. Well, at the end, if we have that money left over, that might be something where the team could decide, you know what, we really need to do something about this printer. Can we upgrade the printer? And I guess I struggle a little bit with this idea that perhaps they may be incentivizing their folks to save money on purpose and to try and save that. And it feels like this might not incentivize them to do that. Does that make sense? And maybe you can speak to that.
Well, you know,
Representative Quam.
first of all, Mr. Chair, I think by having a stronger conversation, so to speak, you're helping, and you're going to have a better organization, because management will understand, oh, this is what they think we need to do, or even if it doesn't happen, by being listened to, I think there's more satisfaction to the worker. The other thing is, if I am a commissioner or director of a group, and we have, in the last budget, saved X amount of money, and it's only going to be a third of what we need to get this software or hardware upgrade. When I come to the committee and I say, we already have, you know, a third of this money, just give us the rest of it, and we can, and that'll save us time and money, increase productivity, but we'll be able to respond to our citizens in a much better fashion. We won't have the crashes, we won't have the delays, we'll be responsive to our citizens. I think the legislature is going to take that and give it more probability of happening than if, yeah, we want this thing. Because not only is there some money, there's the thought from the management and the actual workers of the importance. And the presence of that conversation has an impact upon us legislators, because we like to hear from more than the figurehead sitting up at the table. And that included input and action to get that money set up for there is good. And I would probably, in private, say to the legislators, and you already had the same amount of money put back in your general fund, so really it's only a third of the money, because we saved 2/3. And that's the kind of conversation I think may have an impact to help us justify giving the actual things they need to that group.
Representative Bonner, anything further?
Just one last quick follow-up. I really appreciate that. And I love the idea of that team focus and specifically having goals, right? If you can find ways to save money. My only last question is, I love the idea of we have a third. Could we find a way to get the other 2/3 to meet the need? Statutorily, are there any barriers in the way that would prevent them from keeping that third, or that would not allow them to make that type of investment, as you're suggesting, if they don't have all of the funds?
Representative Quam.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. The structure of having it in a special account that is to be used towards the mission of that entity is some assistance. The other is when you've got management and rank and file both in the conversation and the decision, I think there's more credibility in that action. If there's some additional language to get rid of a loophole, I'm here for the intent. I am not like, oh, this is my wonderful language. No, I'm for the intent. And that's why we have these conversations, is to all the viewpoints looking around might see something that I missed, and we can make it better.
Representative Koznick.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the bill. I just wanted to more broadly address, it's great when members can make comments for or against the bill and speak in committee and not ask a question necessarily, that's okay. Representative Kraft, it's unproductive and unprofessional to attack the administration, and it's not even got to do with the bill. I hope we can do better, because we're going to need to do better in the past.
Mr. Chair, we cannot impugn motives.
Madam Representative Cleavorn, we're
Is to speak to the concerns and the merits of the bill. And I hope that in the future and going forward, we refrain from attacking the administration, whether it's Governor Walz or our President Trump.
Representative Clardy.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to speak directly to the bill. Could you clarify how this interacts with the Odyssey account?
Representative Quam.
My understanding is that it doesn't interact with the Odyssey. It's like if there are these options around, depending on the department, they pick this option or that option. Again, I put a sunset in this so that it would go away if there were problems, or it would allow us to tweak and improve it. The timing of when it went away, other things were going on, and it was just recently that I looked at, pushing it again, because 14 years on the Legislative Audit Commission, I've seen process issues and other things. And the underlying thing is, how can we do things better? And when I look at empowering the person closest to the activity, I think that's a long step towards doing things better.
And Representative Quam, I've asked nonpartisan staff to be our phone a friend. Ms. Roberts is available if you need the answer, but there are two separate funds. They don't necessarily interact directly. And one does not trump the other, and one does not backfill the other. They are two separate funds. So if you need further clarification, Ms. Roberts can give you that. If not, we can also talk offline, but there are two separate accounts. Further questions? Representative Cleaborn to wrap.
Thank you very much. And Chair Quam, I appreciate the fact that you are diligent about this bill, and I admire the fact that you are elevating the voices of our state employees and recognize the fact that they do often have great ideas. And they do often provide those good ideas, and those savings are often incorporated in the work that they do every day in our state. So I appreciate that. The piece that I'm concerned about with this bill is that when you think about the process that the funds have to go through, right, much similar to the Odyssey, right? So an employee recommends to their management, MMB would then have to approve the project out of the SAVI account, and then it would go to the LAC for ultimate approval, right? Oftentimes when the LAC things come out, it's right after session, and a lot of legislators aren't even participating or looking at those reports, as I have discovered in past years when I have been like the only nerdy one asking questions about what the recommendations are. So my concern is that if the LAC does not respond properly and appropriately and quickly, it's an automatic denial. So I would ask you that if this bill moves out of committee, that you, and this is the problem that I have with it going straight to the general register. There are, I think, improvements that could be made for a different way for that process to occur, and I would be happy to work with you. We've never worked on this before, but it has come before the committee every session that I've been on this committee. So I would, I'm not ready to vote for the bill in its current form, but I would be happy to work with you to see if we can find a better way to improve it. And I'm going to ask my team to just vote their conscience however they want to vote. I'm not going to ask them to vote up or down, but I would prefer that it not go to the general register at this time so that you and I could work on it and maybe make it a better process. Thank you.
Representative Quam, closing words.
Thank you for that. And I strive to have, good bills, but I realize that with input from others, we can make, better bills. The LAC is much more familiar with the processes in the different departments. Plus, there are meetings year-round, and there's the involvement on the LAC of members of both chambers and both major parties. So there's a bit of a balance, and I have a little bit of experience, so I trust that as being a good place. If there are amendments that any of you members come to me with and we sit down, I am all for doing a better job. The reason why we had out of 201, you didn't have to use both hands to count the people that voted against it, is because we saw both sides of the money. So half the money to general register, half to, and that way it was middle ground for the, we argue about this side, that side, but it was nice to come together and with something that, was a middle, between the two arguments. So I am going to continue to be available to make things better, and especially if there are any, state workers that are looking at this, let me know. And I'm open, but I don't see another committee that this is really going to, fit into.
Thank you, Representative Quam. And yes, this is going to the General Register. This is the Committee of Jurisdiction. So Chair Quam renews his motion that House File 289 as amended be referred to the General Register. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Your bill is on the way. Thank you, Chair Quam. Next up, we have House File 21, Chair Robbins. And I will just note for authors of the next several bills and folks on the committee that we have a stop time at 10 o'clock. If we choose to drag things out past that, we've booked a room and we will be back at 8 p.m. this evening. So, Chair Robbins, welcome to the committee. As you are not a member of the committee, I will make a motion to bring your House File 21 before the committee with a referral to the General Register. So, Chair Robbins, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This bill is long overdue. This bill will reform the governor's emergency powers. Many of you were not here during the pandemic when we had the governor use the emergency powers currently in statute to shut down our state for 16 months. And I just want to give a brief history of that to paint a picture for all the new members and the audience, and then talk about why this bill is necessary. So in March of 2020, the governor came to each of our caucuses and he said, because of the pandemic, we need to take emergency powers, and I want you to hold me accountable. Don't let me overuse the emergency powers because this is going to be a bumpy ride. He said that to us, I think, in sincerity. And then because of how the statute allows him to declare an emergency, and that emergency continues to be ongoing unless the majority of the legislature stops the emergency power, the emergency continues unless the majority of the legislature of both bodies says, no, we're going to stop the emergency powers. And so we weren't able to stop those emergency powers, even though the state was hurting on so many fronts. And we need to change the law. And this was well documented at the time. We went through 8 special sessions in those 16 months. People were begging us to allow businesses and schools to reopen, allow kids to play on sports teams. But because of the way the statute is structured, where the power rests with the governor and instead of the legislature, we were unable to do that. So basically, HF 21 will change the structure and statute of how emergency powers operate. It is not saying the governor won't have emergency powers. He or she may still have an emergency for 14 days. That gives them the right to respond to floods, tornadoes, cyber attacks, terrorist attacks, any kind of emergency. But at the end of 14 days, the emergency powers will expire unless 3/5 of the legislature in both bodies votes to extend the emergency. So that puts the power back in the body where we are closest to the people and we are responding to what is going on in the constituencies of our districts. Members, it was wrong to let this state be closed down for 16 months. Businesses, schools, we are still feeling the effects of that. In my district this month, a business that was closed during the pandemic and then closed again and was sold, closed again. Its last day is February 23rd. My hairdresser, who tried to keep her business open during the pandemic, ended up having to close. She moved to Florida last month because she couldn't just keep it going. Members, we are still feeling the effects in our students, where achievement rates are under 50% in math and reading because our schools were closed, not to mention the mental health tolls that we faced. My own daughter was a senior in 2020. She didn't get a prom, a graduation, a final concert, all the things, members, that families want and need to mark these important milestones. I have heartbreaking stories of my godfather and many other people in our district whose loved ones died alone because they were not allowed to have anyone visit them. members the consequences of what we did to this state by having that sole emergency power rest with the governor is unconscionable. Not to mention all the businesses that are closed, the inflation that drove, the inability to get groceries, to check on your loved ones, to even have neighbors over. Like, to the NARC line where neighbors would call and report on their fellow neighbors if they happened to have a gathering. Members, what we allowed to happen in this state is unconscionable, and we tried to stop it. We really tried. We had monthly votes to stop the emergency powers, and we were defeated because it only took a majority to say, no, the governor gets to continue the emergency. So we are flipping that on its head in this bill. We are saying, yes, the governor needs some emergency powers, but that duration is 14 days. And if the legislature, not the governor, wants to extend the emergency powers, it takes a 3/5 vote, which is the same as a bonding bill. If we can pass a bonding bill with 3/5, if there's a true emergency, we will pass an emergency power extension with 3/5. So that's the bill, members. I urge your support. We can never go back to what happened in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. We have a list of testifiers. We are going to be calling them, and once again, to reiterate, we have 2 minutes for you to testify, and the committee administrator will help you along the way with the time cards. First on the list, we have Angie Whitcomb, President and CEO of Hospitality Minnesota. If you'd come forward. And as you do so, once you get to the testifiers table, if you would introduce yourself and who you represent and where you're from for the record, and then proceed with your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the impact of the pandemic-related business closures on the hospitality industry in Minnesota. My name is Angie Whitcomb. I'm President and CEO of Hospitality Minnesota. We represent and advocate for the businesses in Minnesota's hospitality industry, including restaurants, hotels, resorts, and other lodging and tourism-related enterprises. The past few years have been among the most challenging our industry has ever faced. The pandemic hit us hard, and many of our members are still recovering as they navigate labor shortages, rising operational costs, and changing consumer preferences. While the pandemic itself was unprecedented in many ways, we can all learn from what we went through, including the public health response and regulatory approach. One thing we already knew was that our industry is and must continue to be nimble. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we were faced with rigid, one-size-fits-all mandates that really challenged our ability to be nimble. The statewide forced closures and operational restrictions imposed on our industry often lacked nuance, disproportionately affecting businesses in different regions and different types of operations. A more localized, flexible approach could have mitigated some of those economic hardships while still prioritizing public health. For example, Wisconsin adopted a county-by-county approach, allowing for localized decision-making that balanced health and economic concerns more effectively. Wisconsin empowered counties and municipalities to set their own restrictions, with some counties enforcing stricter rules while others allowed restaurants to remain open with safety guidelines. Here in Minnesota, we encountered a top-down approach that overlooked the uniqueness of our diverse industry. Some restaurants and hotels were in areas with low case counts, yet faced the same restrictions as those in high-density centers. This meant unnecessary job closures, job losses, and long-term economic setbacks that continue to impact our member businesses today. The hospitality industry is a cornerstone of Minnesota's economy, employing hundreds of thousands and serving as a gathering place for our communities. These economic issues affect workers, businesses, and the state's overall competitiveness.
All right, thank you, Ms. Whitcomb. Appreciate your testimony. We may have to jump around. We've got somebody that's on Zoom, so I want to have IT begin getting them prepared. Next, we are going to have Ray Harrington, and then on deck after that will be Eric Mortensen, and then we're going to go to Rachel Gowdy. So, Mr. Harrington, if you would come to the testifiers table. Once again, introduce yourself for the record, tell us who you represent, where you're from, and proceed with your testimony.
Yes, good morning, Chairman. I'm Ray Harrington. I work at Letness Restaurant Groups. We own, I'm a partner owner in 17 stores throughout Minnesota and Iowa. We're based out of St. Cloud, Minnesota. My partners and I had a very successful restaurant in Moorhead, Minnesota, roughly 60 employees, both a combination of full-time and part-time employees. We had a great year in 2019, not just in Moorhead, but throughout all of our stores throughout Minnesota and Iowa. When the pandemic hit, things kind of went south, as you can imagine. When I say pandemic, for us in the restaurant business, that means the actual illness that hit in March, the 3 weeks to flatten the curve, and the months and months of regulations and closures after that. In Moorhead, during extended shutdown, we lost many customers. They were all basically forced to change their dining habits and ended up going right across the border into Fargo, which the Fargo restaurant business thrived greatly in the summer of 2020. Eventually, with all the restrictions and everything we had going on, we had lost a lot of business and had some very, very hard times. I'm running short of time already, but. And then the second pandemic, or the second closing came in Christmas time, which was the most important time of the year for restaurants. We ended up losing management and employees also who weren't equipped or ready or mentally prepared to deal with a second shutdown. And I lost many of my managers to Florida, North Dakota, places like, okay, I'll finish up, but they, we really need to check on the policies and the regulations that one person can put out, no matter what party or who the governor represents. If it went either way, I think we'd all be really worried about having those powers for that extended period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Former Representative Mortensen, if you'd like to come to the testifiers table. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Good morning, committee. My name is Eric Mortensen. I am currently the president of Action for Liberty, where our mission is preserving liberty for the next generation. And while I appreciate the spirit of Representative Robbins' bill, it falls woefully short of actually stopping tyrannical actions from happening again in this state. It does not address 12.32, which allows the governor in his executive orders to carry the weight of law. So this would be a pro-mask mandate, pro-lockdown, pro-vaccine mandate type of bill. It's a bad bill. It just falls woefully short. Over the last 4 years, we've seen a handful of what I would call fake never again bills get brought before the legislature. And I'd categorize this as another fake never again bill that falls woefully short. It triples, nearly triples, the amount of time the governor can unilaterally declare an emergency from 5 days to 14 days. And the fact that it still retains the ability for one man or woman to unilaterally declare an emergency, appointing themselves the king of the state, is completely unacceptable. We need a real bill, House File 26, that actually prevents this stuff from ever happening again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, former Representative Mortensen. Next, we will go to the Zoom testifier, which I believe is ready. And members across the screen seated from you. So we will have Ms. Gowdy. I believe she's ready.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Please introduce yourself for the record, Ms. Gowdy, and proceed with your testimony. Keep in mind that you have 2 minutes.
Okay, my name is Rachel Gowdy. I live in Big Lake, Minnesota. I currently am a salon suite renter in Elk River, Minnesota, and I'm here today representing the 32,900 licensed practitioners that hold cosmetology licenses of some form. I guess I'd just like to speak about, I feel like Tim Waltz lumped us all into one category for one. When he closed our salons, I don't think he understood that were a lot of self-employed people who were not eligible for unemployment. Our insurance didn't cover any anything for as far as pandemic closures. Had it not been for the CARES Act, I don't know that we would have even gotten any compensation. I personally, it took 8 weeks to get unemployment through the state. Not having a paycheck for, 8 weeks is a really long time. We were threatened with loss of licensure, jail time, fines, all of these things, and our businesses were closed and we had no income coming in. It was very emotionally distressful. We are licensed practitioners. We are licensed to learn or to control infectious diseases, bloodborne pathogens, all kinds of things. And we were already doing things that prevent people from getting sick, and yet we were not able to run our salons. The restrictions, when we finally were opened, he put us at a 25% capacity. That means that maybe 2 people could work at a time to allow for the amount of.
And Ms. Gowdy, if you would conclude, please.
Oh, yes. There needs to be some sort of safeguards in place that, yes, the legislature should be able to override one person just running everything.
Very good. Thank you so much. Next on tap, we have Joel Husby. If you would come to, I don't see anyone responding, so we'll move on to Troy Redding. Also, there we go. Please come forward. As you sit down, please introduce yourself for the record. Tell us who you represent, where you're from, and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Nash, members of the committee. My name is Troy Redding, and I am the owner of Ally Restaurants. We own and operate Rock Elm Tavern in Plymouth and Holman's Table here at the St. Paul Airport. I am here today to share my support of House File 21 based on my experience operating restaurants during the pandemic. In January of 2020, we opened our 4th business in Maple Grove. By July, we closed that restaurant permanently. And in January of 23, due to the impact of losses we experienced, we closed our 2nd Rock Elm Tavern also in Maple Grove. Operating a business during the pandemic brought many unforeseen challenges and a level of uncertainty restaurant owners had never had to deal with before. For the first time in the 38 years of my hospitality career, I was at a loss of how to operate day to day. From supply chain issues to constantly changing health mandates and guidance for employers that differ from federal, state, and local government agencies, it was literally an impossible landscape for over 2 years. While there were state and federal funding programs that tried to ease our financial obligations, these sources were not enough to make up for the losses. Applying for, qualifying for, and managing the paper trail was a full-time job in and of itself. While at the same time, we were trying to keep our employees paid and safe. Every day, we were not able to open for business. We figured out how to transition to takeout, how to serve people in outdoors, how to keep a restaurant afloat that was closed for 10 months and 2 shutdowns. This bill creates much needed accountability and transparency for business owners. We need the landscape to be consistent across the state and agreed upon by the majority of our elected leaders. I applaud the bipartisan work this bill would enforce and thank Representative Robbins for authoring it. I thank you for the opportunity to testify and am available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Redding. That is all the testifiers we had listed for this particular bill. So we will then move to member questions. I think I had Representative Koznick, and then I'll go to Representative Freiberg.
Chair, Representative Robbins, does your bill limit or how does it interact with the National Guard? And my question is kind of from a transportation regarding that specific point, but what about like floods or blizzards, like somewhere, riots or something like that? How's that affected, if you know, on your bill?
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Koznick. Yes, it contains the same language as is in current statute. Nothing in this section limits the governor's authority over command of the National Guard as described in the Military Code, chapters 190 to 192. So the governor would retain the authority to call out the National Guard for the peacetime emergency that's called, but if the legislature chooses to end the peacetime emergency, then he would just have his regular powers over the Guard.
Representative Koznick. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, question maybe for you, Mr. Chair. So this bill makes some changes to Section 12.31 of the Minnesota statutes, the peacetime emergency statute. We have another bill on our agenda that repeals Section 12.31 entirely. Now, I assume the intention is to pass both bills out of this committee. Now, in 2019, I was a first-time chair of a committee, and I had the distinct pleasure of having former Representative Pulowski as a member of my committee, and he
I
felt...
wouldn't say that was a pleasure. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah,
Let's
he
not-
felt very...
Let's not
yeah.
besmirch somebody in
Great.
absentia.
Great, no, great guy personally, but, you know, if you're a first-time chair of a committee, he could be a challenge. One thing he felt very strongly about was that bills going out of, there should be, a committee considering bills should have a consistent position, a coherent position. And so like, I remember one hearing, as a courtesy to a member of the other aisle, I heard two bills. One, and they both did slightly different things, but he let me have it basically as chair he said, you know, it's the job of the committee to decide which bill, you know, what approach a bill is going to take. And here we have two very different approaches to the same section of statute. And I'm just wondering kind of which, I don't know, which bill do you know, I'd never embarrass a chair the way he did to me, but which bill do you like better, Mr. Chair?
Well, Representative Freiberg, my job is to move bills out of committee, and that's what we're going to do. So Representative Robbins' bill is going to the General Register, and the other bill, we're going to be sending it to different committees as different chairs have asked to see that. So thank you, Representative Freiberg.
Follow-up question?
Very well. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you. Well, okay, I guess that's fine. I do think, you know, it probably makes sense for the committee to have a consistent position, but that's fine.
We can talk about that later.
Okay, my second question is, I mean, this bill's pretty clearly deals with, I mean, by definition, almost it's emergency powers. It deals with the operation of state government. Do you think this bill should be referred to, the motion was to refer it to the General Register. It seems to me like this should maybe go to the Elections and Government Operations Committee as well.
Well, thank you, Representative Freiberg. The chair of that committee has not asked to see it in committee, so we will just proceed as the motion was made. So, member questions from here? Next. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Robbins.
And members, just briefly, if you would make sure that when you're speaking, you turn your microphone on and have it relatively close to your face so that I've been getting text from people who are watching from elsewhere and they can't hear people. So if we could.
I was guilty. Mine pulled out, but I had it on.
Very well. Representative Kraft, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How's that? Is that all right?
Much better.
Okay. Representative Robbins, so I think in your reasoning for this, your argument and some of the very heartfelt testimony we heard was that the way that the COVID pandemic was managed was the reason that you're bringing this forward. Is that accurate?
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Kraft. Yes, I believe that there's a power imbalance between the legislature and the executive branch in how we handle emergency powers for the state. Currently, all the power seems to reside with the governor, and I don't think that is in the best interest of the state. So I think the governor absolutely should have some emergency powers. We cannot foresee what will happen, and they definitely need to have the flexibility to deal with an emergency. But we are the legislature, and we should have the authority to choose to continue an emergency or not. And I think that would really provide good balance in our system, and it would ensure that the needs of the people are being addressed, not just the power of the governor being enhanced.
Representative Kraft, follow-up?
Yeah, so 2 points maybe, or a question. Did the legislature, thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins, could the legislature have stopped the state of emergency during the pandemic? I believe, I wasn't here, but I believe in reading it that it could have. Just want to verify.
Yes.
Representative Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the way the statute currently reads is the governor declares an emergency. And just to clarify to the point of one of the testifiers, the governor can declare an emergency for 5 days, but then the executive council, which is his constitutional officers, can extend it for another 30 days. So technically, the first emergency is 35 days, and that is far too long, in my opinion. But then the emergency continues unless the legislature, by a majority vote in each body, decides not to continue it. And why my bill is necessary is because it flips that. In my bill, the emergency ends automatically after 14 days unless the governor requests that the legislature extend it, and then that request has to be upheld by approved by a 3/5 majority, which is the same amount as a bonding bill. So in my view, if we can't get a 3/5 majority to approve extending an emergency, we probably don't need to extend it.
Representative Kraft, briefly?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins. So the legislature can stop it today. And I will point out, the COVID time was really challenging. If you looked at how Minnesota managed the pandemic, and there can be many differences of opinion, but if you look at bottom line of death rates of our state compared to our 4 neighbors, I took a quick look at that for 2020 and 21. Our death rate was substantially lower than those, if you put them together, of North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. It was lower individually and lower in total. If our death rates were on the average of our neighbors, another 2,000, in my quick math here, another 2,308 Minnesotans would have died. So I understand where you're going, but the premise that it was mismanaged, I think, is questionable. Thank you.
Representative Quam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my understanding is part of the contributing factor to death rate was the demographics of senior citizens, and because we are one of the few states that still tax Social Security, and a lot of the seniors move to other states, maybe we would need more analysis to take any conclusion from that. I look more at the impact to our students. And with the decisions by the executive branch and the impact to the schools, and we had debates back during the time because Scandinavian countries and other countries realized this is not impacting youth unless they had, another condition. So that the rate, once you were lower than about 70, dropped off the cliff. So the executive powers impacted our students, which still have not recovered from the Reading Act, Math Act, and all those repercussions. One person can make a decision and generally be right, but with the legislature, we have the capability of all the viewpoints coming together and saying, this makes sense, this doesn't. And that's the big difference. We can agree that there is a bad situation, but without the broad discussion and input from multiple people like we see in the legislature, oftentimes parts of that decision end up being very flawed. And I'm not going to argue that something didn't need to be done. I'm just arguing that this bill is a way to make it a broader group of responsibility. It's, when first responders come out, some people have first responders that are EMTs and that, they don't have an ambulance, but it's rural and they get there quick. Sometimes they beat law enforcement out to the site and they help out, and law enforcement comes, they help out. But when the ambulance crew comes there, they take over. And that short period of time for the executive branch it's an emergency, should be a short period of time, and the rest of the people should take over. So I support the intent in the bill. If we want to argue about number of days and things like that, well, let's look at that. But let's not forget that we, as a group, should be able to address it better than a single, even wonderful person could. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have actually a series of questions.
Representative Bonner, we are going to get to a vote on this by 6.
I'll do my best to be quick, Mr. Chair.
I would encourage you to prioritize the need for this committee to be done on time.
So the first is, can you briefly tell me what the role of the legislature is? I think they have two primary responsibilities. Can you tell me what they are?
Representative Robbins.
Our responsibility is to represent our constituents and to ensure that there's a budget for the state and to oversee the executive branch.
Well,
Representative Bonner.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the answer should be, just to be clear, is probably that we oversee the budget and we also regulate and create and review the laws of the state of Minnesota. But secondly, can you explain to me the role of the executive and how that differs from the legislative branch?
Representative Robbins.
Yes, the legislature makes the laws, the executive branch implements the laws.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you for that. Would you agree that the legislature generally is, I mean, much to the chagrin of the general public, that we tend to be more deliberative? We take a long time to come to decisions, and we do that because we think about how to flip it and turn it and what does that look like, and we have to get a lot of input from a lot of stakeholders, which means that the timeline for us to make a decision can be really lengthy and really difficult. Versus the executive branch, who's really the individual where the buck stops here, right? They have to make quick decisions in things like emergencies. I mean, wouldn't you agree that we are by far the more deliberative of those two?
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the legislature does have a very excellent deliberative function, and I think we do it well. But we have an oversight function of the executive branch. And the reason HF 21 is important is because it preserves the governor to have some emergency powers, but it's not carte blanche and it's not unlimited. So we will then retain our authority over the executive branch by having to extend the powers, not just by a 3/5 vote. It would take the whole body to agree with the governor that, yes, the emergency is ongoing. And that is an important check on the power of the executive branch in this state.
Representative Bonner, you still have one question to go?
I do.
You said you had 3, so here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will say this, that I think one of the things that, well, one, I'm delighted that you actually changed the window from 5 to 14 days, because when we consider the items that are on this list, like a terrorist incident, a cyber attack, industrial incident, technological failures and malfunctions, acts of nature, I think we would all agree that 5 days is often probably not sufficient. It might be sufficient for a snow emergency, but it's probably not sufficient for most of the things on this list. So I appreciate that about your bill. I also appreciate that rather than a 2/3, you went with a 3/5, which is a slightly smaller.
Representative Bonner, is there a question?
Yes, there is. However, this is where I'm really concerned. Generally speaking, the legislature takes a considerable amount of time to make decisions. we're not quick. And I believe during COVID, we had 7 different special sessions.
There were 8.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Representative Robbins will speak through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. But, so we had 8, in which we approved additional funding, we approved additional resources, and made modifications to policy during that time. So we had a voice as a legislative body. But my worry here is that we are setting a pretty dangerous precedent if we are limiting the ability of the executive, who is the person who has to make those tough calls in a quick turnaround, which is not the function of the legislature. But my other concern and my question.
Question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, is that I understand what the businesses have said about closing and opening back up. And my friend from Rock Elm, I'm not sure where he's sitting. By the way, I love that restaurant and did many events there. But here's what I heard from him. And here's where this ties into the emergency powers and my question. So if we shut down and we give them 14 days, it expires. Let's say we don't agree to renew. And so we open everything back up, for example, as in the pandemic. But then, within a short amount of time, we realize that the infection rates have doubled, tripled, quadrupled. People are dying. And we have to go back as a body and have another question. I guess there's kind of a two-parter here. Does the governor then call a second emergency and we start the clock over again? Does that mean the legislature then has to have this 3/5 majority in order to reinstate the emergency? And further, when we talk about those small businesses, what I heard was the real killer here is they closed, they reopened, and then they had to close again,
Chair
in
Robbins,
which their
would you like to
folks were
address
not ready for that. And I have to ask, if
Representative
we
Bonner,
continue to open
we
and
have 5 minutes
close,
before the vote. Ask your question, please.
I'm getting that. If we open and close consistently, isn't that going to be much harder for businesses to anticipate
Chair Robbins.
for employees and payrolls and budgets and all of those things?
Chair Robbins.
Mr. Chair, Representative Bonner. So I believe that we are vesting too much power in the executive. So if there's an emergency called, and in practicality, as we saw last time, it wasn't the 5 days, it was 35 days, because we had those special sessions when that 35-day clock ran out every month. That's just how it was. So in practicality, it's not 5 days, it's 35 days. And if we do not make it automatically expire, but instead the emergency is under current law where it stays in perpetuity, that is not serving our state well. We as the legislature need to provide balance to the executive branch and oversight of that emergency power. It impacted every aspect of all of our lives for 16 months, and it was an absolute overreach of executive power, and it has to be reined in, and it's up to us to rein it in by statute. So yes, to the exact question, if the emergency expires after 14 days, and the governor still felt there was a need to continue it, the governor would be able to issue another emergency order. My guess is if there really isn't a need for the emergency order, or the entire legislature has voted by 3/5 to already not extend it, then he would be reticent to do that, or she.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to be brief. I just want to make a comment here. The dangerous precedent has already been set, and it's the legislature's job to fix it, because we are the voice in this House for we the people, and we the people are the ones with whom all the inherent power of government has been given, and it concerns me how much power we continue to give to the ever-growing beast of government. So I thank you for this bill. This bill is is a champion for we the people. During that pandemic, or declared pandemic, there was a mandate sent out by the executive branch that I had to shut down my church. These are unalienable rights. You see, my Bible says that do not forsake the assembly of yourselves, as is the habit of some. My God tells me I'm to go to church, I'm to fellowship with other believers, and I had a man in the executive branch saying I couldn't do that. I disobeyed that mandate because it was unconstitutional. I actually have a right to do that as well. So I thank you that you're bringing common sense back to the legislature here, back to legislation in our laws. Thank you so much. I completely support your House file here. Thank you.
We have 3 minutes before the vote. Representative Cleavorn, you've got a couple minutes, and then we'll go to Chair Robbins to conclude. So please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Robbins. I want to acknowledge the pain and suffering that COVID brought to our state. I want to acknowledge that businesses did suffer. I want to acknowledge that students did suffer. I want to acknowledge the pain, the absolute undoable pain that the death that COVID brought to our state is real, 100%. It hasn't been said here, but we lost 17,000 Minnesotans. That's a lot of pain and suffering. What we don't know is how many more we would have lost without the emergency powers. That we don't know. And so anyway, I just want to acknowledge that. And I heard the pain in your voice when you talked about your daughters missing their graduation. And we heard the pain of many people whose children couldn't go to their proms or sports activities. That's real. All that pain is real. That pain was not caused by the governor. That pain was caused by COVID. And whether we agree on what procedures should or shouldn't have been handled in the medical world, I'm not an expert. But I want to acknowledge the pain was real. Now to the bill, which is the reason that we're here today. This bill was written by the legislature. The governor did nothing that was illegal, which is why you're here today to say, let's change it. Okay. I want to remind the body that we had 7.5 hours, this body, of talking about hamburgers when we should have been talking about other things. We have not been able to pass a bonding bill.
Chair Cleavorn, let's stick to this bill.
I am sticking to this bill because we're talking
What
about,
happened last year. in
we're
a different-
talking about what this body can do. We have not been able to pass a good bonding bill because it requires such a high threshold of vote. So my question is when we have floods that are damaging a community, exactly how are we going to get past it when we have members of this body who can't even agree what emergency powers should look like, right? There are lots of different opinions about that. The other question I have for you, or the statement, you said, you referred to the constitutional officers as his constitutional officers. I'd like to remind the body and the members here present today that Governor Walz and the constitutional officers are separate. Constitutional officers are elected by the people, by the majority of the people, and they have the full force and effect of the voters of Minnesota. The same is true for the governor. So while we pass legislation for the executive to execute based on what we do, they are not without power from the people of the state of Minnesota. And it's really important we remember that. The legislature had complete ability, has always had complete ability to override the governor's executive powers. We had that ability by a majority of each body, and these bodies decided not to do that. So we were, in fact, partners in that work of providing safety measures for Minnesotans. Members, I'm going to ask our team to vote no on this bill. I don't believe that this is necessary. We already have the authority We have granted the power to the governor to do this. And when we have an emergency, whether it's avian influenza or a flood or a cyber attack or a terrorist attack, that power lies with us, and we should retain that power as it is currently in statute. Thank you.
Thank you, Lead Claiborne. Chair Robbins, closing, and then we'll get to a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members, for the great discussion. I really appreciate it. And to your point, yes, constitutional officers are all elected in their own right. The situation we had in 2016 is that the governor and the constitutional officers were all of the same party, and they also had the majority in the House. And so there wasn't the political will to override the governor. That was the problem. And so the legislature needs
2016,
to
that's not true.
change the law. I totally agree. The legislature set up the current statute, and we are the ones who can change it. So the current framework is the governor's emergency powers extend forever. And we're just flipping that on its head and saying, no, the emergency power expires automatically. Rather than continuing automatically, it expires automatically at 14 days unless 3/5 of both bodies vote to extend it. And I think that change in orientation so that the legislature has more authority, it's a balance. The governor still gets 14 days, but then the legislature has to extend. And members, I really think we lived 16 months of adverse impacts on our state that we are still feeling today. I can't stress that enough. We are still being harmed today by how this emergency was handled. Let's learn from our mistakes, let's change the power, and let's restore balance to the emergency powers statute. Thank you, members.
Mr. Chair, the request a roll call on the vote.
Roll call has been requested. Roll call will be granted. Chair Robbins, thank you for your bill. I agree that this has to change. There are some changes that are very much necessary, and that I would remind my friends on the other side of the aisle that, yes, the legislature does have oversight and accountability to the executive branch. Please never forget that. The assistant will call the roll. Oh, wait, I need to renew the motion that House File 21 will be referred to the General Register.
Chair Nash.
Aye.
Vice Chair Davis.
Aye.
Representative Anderson. Aye. Representative Bonner.
No.
Representative Clardy.
No.
Representative Freiberg.
No.
Representative Howard.
No.
Representative Jones.
No?
Representative Joy.
Yes.
Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
No.
Representative Quam. Representative Sexton.
Yes.
There being 7 ayes and 6 nays, the bill is passed and it is moving to the General Register. Thank you, Chair Robbins.
Thank you.
Next, we have House File 26, Representative Roach. If you would please come to the table. All right. And I will remind members, we have 25 minutes before the end of committee, and we have booked the room for 8 p.m. So Representative Roach, as you are not a member of the committee, I will move your bill, House File 26, to come before the committee. The referral will be to the Committee on Health. To your bill.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I want to thank you at this time for considering this important legislation. The Never Again Act is in response to the overreach and abuses by a runaway governor who invented penalties for violation of his executive orders, pretending he's a legislator, banned the free exercise of religion, violating the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Minnesota Constitution, Article 1, Section 16, took private property in violation of the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and he banned nearly all non-emergency medicine. This issue is what motivated me to get involved and run for office, and this is a top priority for not only my constituents, but many Minnesotans across the state. Mr. Chair and members, this is the real Never Again bill. While others have peddled bills that would leave room for governors to lock down the state, and I appreciate their effort, this is the only bill that will remove the power and protect our families and community members. The Never Again Act does 4 things. It removes the governor's unilateral ability to declare an emergency. It ensures that if another governor goes rogue, they go to jail for violating your rights. It clarifies that executive orders are not law. And it protects the people of the state from tyranny by ensuring their rights. It is a Bill of Rights. Mr. Chair, thank you for your time, and I'd ask that you recognize our testifiers regarding this critical piece of legislation.
Well, Representative Roach, before we do that, we're going to get to the series of amendments that have been introduced. Now. So who has the A1? Representative Bonner. Microphone on, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we talked a lot about rights and freedoms, and first I just want to be clear, you mentioned that we restricted during the pandemic the ability to practice religion. Last time I checked, I'm a solid, hardcore Christian. I pray, I read my Bible, I do all of that at home, I do that with my family, and I don't think that there was anything specifically in the executive orders that curtailed that. So I just want to be very clear about that. As a Christian, I find that slightly offensive. But that said, I do want to say,
Representative Bonner, give me just 1 second. Members of the crowd, we're not going to engage in commentary that's at that level. We're going to let the committee do the committee work, and if you can't do that, we're going to ask you to leave. Representative Bonner.
thank you, Mr. Chair. But then specifically, we want to talk about rights. And I noticed that in your bill, it very clearly delineates very specific things, but it leaves out others. And I'm really struggling with why we left out parts of the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment. And if that is in fact your intent, is to not impede on people's rights, then why would we not include things like the freedom of the press and the right to free speech? I struggle with that. That feels like a fundamental right that everyone in this room believes in. And I would suspect, as someone who works with Action for Liberty, you believe highly in that value. And while I may disagree with you, I agree that you have the right to speak. And I agree that the press should exist and have the ability to do that. Secondly, we left out the freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, the freedom for excessive bail, the freedom for cruel and unusual punishment, and the freedom of conscience. And I feel like those things were deliberately left out, and I am not certain why, but my amendment would essentially put back in the portions of the First, Fourth, and Eighth Amendments that you had left out.
So Representative Bonner moves the A1. Representative Roach, would you like to discuss that?
Mr. Chair, Representative Bonner, I appreciate your willingness to add more civil liberties, so I would accept that amendment. I am not opposed to any of those civil liberties that you're asking for. I think you're right on. So I appreciate the amendment.
Okay. Representative Bonner has moved the A1. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The A1 is engrossed. Move it to the A2. Who's got that? Representative Freiberg, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amends the section dealing with what data the legislature can rely on before it declares an emergency. It currently only lists a few federal agencies. It says, the legislature can declare an emergency when emergency exists when there's information from the president, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Department of Defense, or the National Warning System indicates the imminence of a national emergency. The fact that they're federal is fine. My amendment actually adds an additional federal agency, the CDC, and it also adds the Department of Health and Human Services. I feel like as bird flu continues to spread around the country, resulting in mass livestock death, it would be good to keep apprised of what the Department of Health and Human Services and the CDC are saying on the issue, and I think that should guide the legislature's decisions, as well as these other agencies and executives mentioned.
So Representative Freiberg moves the A2. Representative Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Freeberg. I'm going to respectfully reject that. As we've seen, the CDC has made many recommendations during the pandemic that have turned out to be far from the truth. And so, to be honest, I don't feel comfortable adding the CDC anywhere near this bill. So I would reject that.
Representative Freiberg move the A2.
I'd like to request a roll call.
Representative Freiberg requests a roll call. We will have a roll call. The clerk will, well, you're not the clerk, the CA will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
No.
Vice Chair Davis.
No.
Representative Anderson. Representative Bonner.
Yes.
Representative Clardy.
Yes.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Yes.
Representative Joy.
No.
Representative Kosnick. Representative Kraft.
Yes.
Representative Quam.
That's no. No, he said no. He just said no in Russian.
Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 noes and 6 yeas, the amendment is not adopted. We will move on to the A3. Representative Howard, I believe you have that. Would you like to move the A3
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll move the A3.
to your amendment?
Mr. Chair and Representative Roach, welcome to the legislature. Nice to meet you for the first time. This amendment deals with, it would add back in the statutes dealing with the effective dates and all like executive orders. And just to start, I wanted to ask a question to make sure I understand the intent here. Is your intent here to repeal the ability for the governor to enact any executive orders?
Representative Roach.
My intent here is to make sure that the governor does not have unilateral authority over the people and gives the power back to the state legislators.
Representative Howard.
Chair Nash, that wasn't exactly my question, Representative Roach. I'm curious if you think the governor, is the intent of this bill to repeal any executive order at all? Like, should the governor have the ability to bring forward an executive order?
Representative Roach.
As we saw during COVID, the governor used his authority to strip away people's rights, take away their ability to make a living, kept people from churches, destroyed families. People died in the hospital without their family members. So this absolutely would take away the governor's ability to do so.
Representative Howard, quickly.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry I haven't got an answer from the author yet. So I understand your perspective on that, the peacetime emergency, but I'm asking you, is the intent of your bill so that the governor cannot deliver any executive orders? That's my question, yes or no?
Representative Roach.
My intent of this bill is to protect the citizens of Minnesota so that a king doesn't have the authority over them and the legislature does.
Representative Roach, we're going to avoid the words like king or dictator for the purpose of discussion today. Thank you.
Yep.
Representative Howard. Mr. Chair, and I'm seriously, I'm not trying to play gotcha. I seriously want to understand your intent. And so the question is, do you think, yes or no, that the governor should have the ability to bring forward an executive order? Or is it your intent that he should not have that ability at all?
Representative Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Howard. Again, the purpose of this bill is to make sure that the governor does never again has the opportunity to dictate how people go about their lives. That is the sole purpose of this bill.
Representative Howard, and just members, again, we've got 15 minutes before we're going to try to get to a vote, so let's try to get there.
Well, Chair, I'm doing my darndest here.
I understand. Please do your best, a little quicker, maybe.
Well, it might help if I get an answer to the question, but let me try another way, Representative Roach. Should the governor have the ability to deliver an executive order dealing with deploying the National Guard to, say, help in a natural disaster, either here or in another state?
Representative Roach.
Although I see where you're trying to go with it, again, this bill is to protect the people of Minnesota, to make sure that he doesn't have authority over their lives as a unilateral decision maker. It puts the authority back in the body of the legislature.
So Representative Howard, I think we've gone down the road a couple times.
No, but this is pretty important because Chair Nash, this bill as drafted would essentially neuter the ability for the governor to make any executive order. So in that exact example, which just happened recently, Governor Walz issued an executive order to deploy the National Guard to help with Hurricane Helene in Florida. This bill repeals all effective dates for all executive orders. And so that's my question about your intent. Is that your intent? Should the governor have been able to make that executive order for the National Guard to be deployed to help with the Hurricane Helene?
Representative Roach.
As I've stated before, again, the intent of this bill is to make sure that family members don't die alone in the hospital, that business owners have an opportunity to make a living for their family, that kids aren't pulled from their school and have continued long-term mental health effects. That is the sole purpose, to make sure that this never happens again, and this bill does that.
Chair Nash and Representative Roach, the problem is that's not what your bill does.
Representative Howard.
Your bill includes a broad removal of the statute related to all executive orders and their effective dates. And so what your bill would do is take away the ability for the governor to bring forward an executive order to deploy the National Guard. It would take away the ability of the governor to deploy an executive order to help our veterans, as a recent executive order took place. And so I understand what you're trying to do, but the challenge is your bill doesn't do that, which is the reason I brought forward this amendment to take away those effective dates. So Representative Roach, if that is your intent for the sole intent of the bill, I would think this would be an amendment you would want to take. You know, and members, if we don't take this amendment, I think all of us need to be eyes wide open. This is a pretty broad and poorly constructive way to go about this intent, with significant impacts for our governor's ability to bring forward executive orders that are needed, prescient, and important for our state. And so I would urge a yes vote on the A3.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I respond one more time to that?
We're going to get to the vote. Representative Roach, you've already stated your opinion on the A3, so all in
And
favor?
Mr. Chair, I have a request a roll call vote.
Representative Howard requests a roll call on the A3, and I'll just make this suggestion. This bill has many committee stops after this. I have to think that Representative Roach would be more than willing to talk with you and work with you as we move this along the way. Representative Roach, is that correct?
I would be open to a discussion about something, but
very well.
It's got a ways to go.
All right. The committee assistant will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
No.
Vice Chair Davis.
No.
Representative Anderson. Representative Bonner.
Yes.
Representative Clardy.
Yes.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Yes.
Representative Joy.
No.
Representative Koznick.
No.
Representative Kraft.
Yes.
Representative Quam. Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 noes and 6 yeses, the amendment is not adopted. We will now go to testifiers, and because I would really like to be done at 10, we are going to give preference to people first who have not testified previously. So we're going to bring up Lisa Monet-Zarza. And then I believe we have Riggs and Manders, and then former Representative Mortensen, since you've testified previously, we'll try to get to you before the committee is done, but we'd like to be done on time. So please introduce yourself for the record and keep your testimony brief, as we would like to get to a vote. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Lisa Monet-Zarza, and I'm the previous owner of 2 restaurants in the state of Minnesota, Alibi Drinkery in Lakeville and Froggy Bottoms in Northfield. On November 20th of 2020, Governor Walz enacted the Executive Order 2099, which took the occupancy rate of 50% across the state and shut down all restaurants, hair salons, and gyms 100%, at the same time opening up all retail stores 100% before Black Friday. This was both an unconstitutional and a discriminatory action against a specific group of business owners in the state. There was no scientific evidence linking the spread of COVID in our industries. On December 16th, I made the decision with other restaurant owners to open up our restaurant. I was sued by the Attorney General. My liquor license was revoked for 5 years. The city of Northfield refused to issue my liquor license in their city, claiming that I was not of moral character to have a liquor license. The Minnesota Department of Health first suspended and then further revoked my food service license, although I had never violated a food code. I was banned from owning a restaurant in the state of Minnesota for 5 years, and I essentially lost both restaurants because of this. I was unhireable in my profession of 30 years and was forced to find employment in Wisconsin, where I bought a bar. I've commuted 2 hours a day for 3 years. I was sued in the amount for $300,000 by the Attorney General, and I was forced to file personal bankruptcy. All of this happened because of an unconstitutional, unlawful, and discriminatory action by Governor Walz. I'm here today to ask you to never allow the rights of the citizens of this state to be seized by an unconstitutional executive order by the governor.
Thank you, Ms. Zarza.
Thank you, Chair.
Is Nicole Riggs here? Okay. And Ms. Riggs, please, let's be brief as we're doing our testimony. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Good morning.
If you could speak into the microphone.
Sure. Good morning, Chair. My name is Nicole Riggs. Sorry. I'm representing COVID Justice Minnesota and all the families that lost someone to the hospital protocols. My dad, Ralph Markson, was hospitalized on August 23rd of 2021. We were not able to visit him in the most vulnerable and terrible time in his life and ours. We weren't allowed to advocate for him when he needed us the most because of the governor's emergency order. One man, one opinion. My parents were married for 50 years. My mom always helped make his medical decisions, but during this time, no one was able to be with him. We were never offered a tablet to FaceTime, see, or even talk into my dad's room to comfort him. My dad's records show that he was asking the staff for bedside comfort from them. So why was his family not allowed to come and comfort him while he was still aware enough to know that we were there with him? Our requests for simple treatments like basic vitamin C and vitamin D were all denied. I asked that he be removed from a drug that was causing him to retain fluid and making him worse. That was also denied. I believe they were able to deny our requests because they had no family in person to hold them accountable. They were able to do whatever they wanted to do to my wonderful dad without question. My dad was ventilated 6 days into his visit and not given any other options for treatment. 6 hours after being ventilated, he was put on strong drugs to sedate and paralyze him an inch from death. He was left in that condition for 10 days. We begged to come and visit, but we're told we couldn't come until day 16, even though the mandated quarantine time then was only 10 days.
And
When
Ms.
we
Riggs,
finally-
I hate to interrupt you, but if you could conclude.
I'll go faster.
Thank you, ma'am.
When we finally reached the 16 days after an agonizing wait, we called the hospital and we told them we were coming. When they informed us that they had decided that we needed to wait another 7 days before we could visit, and we felt so helpless. That's when we had it. I called and requested my dad's records from the hospital to see what's really going on there. They denied our request for my dad's medical records because we couldn't provide his death certificate because he was still alive at that time. Within hours of requesting his records, we were called and told that my dad was actively dying and that we could now come because they expected that he would die that night. The expectation that we need to agree, under the expectation that we need to agree to turn off his life support to be allowed to come. How is it that we couldn't go that morning, but if we agreed to turn off his life support, then we could? And how could we not go? We couldn't stomach the thought of him dying alone without having anyone for 16 days and die in his room without even a touch from someone that truly loved him. So we went that day. They told us only 2 of us could go, but my mom demanded that she have me and my brother there. The hospital made us wear space-like helmets that had a motor running in the back. It was loud, and we were not even able to kiss my dad's skin to stand to say goodbye for the last time. Our spouses, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren were never allowed to say goodbye to him. We prayed and read scripture over him before we turned off his ventilator. But after going through the medical records, we believe that the drug cocktail of fentanyl, propofol, and midazolam in his last moments contributed more to his death than the removal of the ventilator. I am now part of a local Minnesota group called COVID Justice Minnesota. I've spoke to and welcomed over 100 or 200 families into our group. So many of those wonderful families have stories just like ours. Many of these sweet people were left to die alone because of the governor's order. I believe when the world learns what truly happened to these innocent, vulnerable, and special people, that there will be a cry in the nation for these inhumane deaths. Prisoners are punished with isolation. We should not be doing this in our hospitals in America. We need to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Emergency powers should not be up to the governor. This is the decision that should be made by state legislature. That's why I'm supporting House Bill 26.
Thank you, Ms. Riggs. I think there's a lot of sympathy on this from all of us. My best friend in the world was in the hospital, and he survived. My mother-in-law was in the hospital, and we had to fight to help her, and she did survive. But members, we are at 9:59. I am going to put us into recess to the call of the chair, 8 p.m. this room. We will then conclude our time and finish this bill then. But before we go into recess, I think Representative Roach failed to mention at the beginning of his bill presentation that much like a dutiful freshman, he brought treats for everybody. And they are at the back over there. So if you'd like a donut, if you need a little sugar fix, we'll make those available to you. Lead Cleaborn, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to say that when we are planning our agendas, right, and we know that we have two bills like this that are going to be, you and I have always agreed that public testimony is the most important thing. So when we have two bills like this where people would want to come in and testify, and especially when the other bill that was on the agenda today was Chair Quam's, that could have easily have been moved to another day, but so it would have allowed us more time during this time when people traveled to hear all of the debate. I mean, we're asking people now, if they want to hear our debate on this bill, they have to stick around the Capitol all day and then wait to hear what the rest of us have to say about this bill. And I think it would have made more sense if we would have only scheduled the two bills and had that robust conversation with the public in the room and be able to hear the full dialogue about the bills. Thank you.
Well, Lead Cleaborn, I appreciate your opinion, but I will also point out that there were a number of occasions that you yourself called us back into evening session. So once again, I am sympathetic, but only to a point, given that you did this many times yourself. So therefore, members, watch your email from committee staff, and we will return here at 8 p.m. We are in recess.